Thank you. Is this my copy? Yes, it is. Okay. So, Mr. Manager, we are now starting with Article 20.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening.
Oh, hold on. We should do the quorum and to make sure. I mean, I look, but I want to make sure everybody's machines are working, so my bad. So we'll test to make sure that everybody's clickers are working, and then we'll do it. Pardon? There's no timer? Okay.
We have a quorum.
I don't know.
Doesn't matter. As soon as you hit.
If you have not voted because we don't have a timer, there's some people here who I think I've seen who I don't see their votes. Has everyone voted? And has everybody seen their names? Okay, I declare we do have a quorum, 124 members. Thank you. Now, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, town meeting representatives and those in the audience who are watching at home. Article 20 is the Community Preservation Omnibus article. This is the customary article we have at the spring annual town meeting, which deals with the Community Preservation Fund's status from prior year projects. We pay the debt service. We provide the administrative funding for the operations during the upcoming year, and then we make sure we set aside the 10% for reserves as required under the community preservation law. So as you can see on the slide here, the estimated revenue projection for the upcoming fiscal year is roughly 1.28 million. And as you can see, the bulk of that comes from the property tax surcharge. And unfortunately, with the state revenue component now, you can see is really at a level of just over about 13%. So we're anticipating 1.28 million in the Community Preservation Fund revenues for the year. We're required to allocate the 10% to the individual components of open space, historical preservation, and community housing. And then the balance goes to the budgeted reserve, which means that the balance can be used for any municipal purpose, including consisting of those three purposes listed above that. Here is the status of the debt service on the Community Preservation Fund. The Town Halls project, the debt service for the $2.8 million bond for the upcoming fiscal year is just under $311,000. And as you can see, the parentheses on the right-hand side indicates that the bond will be paid off in full in 2 later fiscal years, in the years 2021. The next portion is for Sheehan Farm. The community appropriated $785,000 for that purchase. The debt service for the upcoming fiscal year is just under $94,000. And that debt service expires in 2023. Chelmsford Woods, which is the affordable housing project on Littleton Road, across from the mobile home park. That right now, if you go by there, you see the phase 2 units under construction. The $1.5 million contribution from community housing for that project. The debt service for this year on that is $140,375, and that has 10 more years of debt service life on that project. The next one is the turf fields, the $1.2 million bond over a 10-year period remaining. The debt service this year is declined down to $109,000. The final one after that is the Varney Playground Phase 1 project. It's only just over $15,000. And the final one is the Roberts Field Playground. Those bonds have not been issued at this point in time. However, we project based on current interest rates for the 10-year debt cycle for that project that the payment would be $63,000. So you can see the debt service total for the current fiscal year upcoming fiscal year is $731,975, and that basically is the three components of the article. So it's the payment of the debt service, the appropriation to the reserves, and the $50,000 set for the administrative expenses for the fund. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 20.
Did the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval of Article number 20.
I don't know. Community preservation? Do you have a Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So that was the start of my question, was did they have a recommendation? But in the past, I'm noticing with these numbers that there's very little left over after you fund the necessary reserves in the debt service for any new uses. And and we're committed going out quite a ways. So that won't free up very quickly. And I'm wondering, is there any information that can be provided to the body about what the balances are in these reserve funds so that we understand what's going on?
Sure, I'll turn the microphone to Darlene Lucier, our town accountant, who will give a status of the fund balances for the Community Preservation Fund.
Good evening. I'm going to give you the balances, what they were for June 30th of last year, because I haven't closed for this year. We won't know the balances. But the undesignated fund balance, which is kind of similar to a free cash, whatever's left at the end of the fiscal year goes into this account. We ended the fiscal year last year at 1.3 million. So that's what's in the undesignated fund balance. Again, that can be used for a land purchase, or something that's going to be coming up for a project. And then in the reserve for expenditures, there was $384,000 in that balance. So those are accounts that can be, one that's reserved for expenditures, and the other one is undesignated, which again can be used for any projects that are going to be coming up from CPC. In the balances for the three buckets, the open space, the housing, and historic, there's actually no balances, because what we've been doing is we've been putting the money in those accounts and then taking the money right out to actually pay down the debt on any of those projects. That's kind of been the way that the CPC committee has decided to do that. So when we're putting the $100,000 in, we're taking it right out of those accounts. So in those buckets, really there's no balances in those accounts. So the two major accounts that do have balances in them is the reserve for expenditure of $384,000 and then $1.3 million in the undesignated. I've been advising the committee to build up that undesignated fund. So we really haven't had a lot of big projects come up in the last couple of years. We've been actually trying to set aside some money because before that fund was very low, and bond counsel was looking at that saying, you're really running too low in that account. So we've been advising them to kind of look at the projects, instead of spending the cash on the projects, to actually bond for the projects and kind of build up this kind of like little stabilization or undesignated fund balance in this fund. So those are the balances in that account. I'd be happy to answer any other questions if anybody has on the account, but that's
Thank you. Anyone have any questions or comments? There being none, a vote will authorize the Community Preservation Committee funds for this fiscal year. The article passes unanimously, 130 in favor, no opposed, no abstentions. Manager, number 21, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 21 is the Community Preservation Fund's request to appropriate $50,000 from the general undesignated reserve for the rehabilitation and restoration of land for recreational use, including replacement of playground equipment and other capital improvements thereon. What this is the Community Preservation Fund traditionally has had $50,000 accounts available in the areas of recreational, open space, and so forth. And the idea of these funds are that when small projects come up during the course of the fiscal year, they're able to receive those requests and provide a $10,000, $15,000 or so match in order to arise at projects that come up during the year. Otherwise, they'd be forced to postpone action and bring each individual minor project to a town meeting for appropriation. So again, this is replenishing this account with a $50,000 appropriation at this time. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 21.
Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval of Article number 21.
Thank you. And Community Preservation? Thank you. For those who couldn't hear, they recommend approval of their own article. Are there any questions or inquiries, comments?
Sue Carter, Precinct 5. Of that $50,000, is it only for recreational use? Like if an Eagle Scout comes in and has a project, does that come out of that $50,000? Or I'm
Yes.
just not sure how it's used.
Chairman Rue will answer the question for you.
Improvements.
Hi, Ed Rue, Precinct 6. To answer the question, if I heard it correctly, this article is specifically for the Bvam School. No, wait a second.
No, that's the next one.
That's the next one. Okay, this is for the Eagle Scouts and all of that, all of those projects.
So it's not just recreation, it's other open space projects as well?
Open, yeah, usually they'll do, they've done benches, things at the
Yep.
Lewis Farm.
It was just the wording that I wasn't sure about where it said
Yeah, I got confused because they're both 50, I think.
recreational use.
Yeah,
Yeah, so-
yeah. So that's how the money's moved.
Thank you, Mr. Rue.
Claire Janot, Precinct 7, point of clarification. So if we approve this article for $50,000, does it increase that $384,000? Is it going into the same?
No, it's a distinct fund that the accountant sets up with a $50,000 appropriation.
So we're earmarking a
Earmarking,
piece of the
exactly.
undesignated?
Yes, from the
Thank you.
general, yes.
When we do that, how much of it gets spent each year? Is that building up at all?
No, it varies upon the year. It does not build up.
Okay.
They come back to replenish it once it gets down to a figure of $5,000 or $10,000.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? There appear to be none. So we will now vote on Article 21 to appropriate $50,000 from the Community Preservation Fund General Reserve for the rehabilitation and restoration of land for recreational use, including replacement of playground equipment and other capital improvements. She's one of two. Okay, the article passes 129 in favor, 2 opposed, no abstentions. We will now proceed to Article 22.
Article 22 is the next and final Community Preservation Fund on the warrant this town meeting. And this is a specific project with a dollar amount of $75,000. And this is a request to appropriate funds from the Community Preservation Fund for the reconstruction of a playground at the Bvam Elementary School. And I'm going to turn the podium over to Nick Parley, who's the town's among his many duties with the towns, has been overseeing and assisting with playground safety and construction projects, and he will begin this article and be assisted in this presentation. There are some slides that he'll be presenting to you that didn't make it into the printing, but you'll be all set.
Good evening. My name is Rachel Zeminski. I am a parent volunteer, a parent of a child at Bvam School, and I'll be presenting with Nick Parley from the DPW this evening.
she's a resident, isn't she?
So tonight we'd like to review the playground replacement needs, tell you about the steps that we've taken to this point, review the scope of the project and discuss the budget, and then talk about what the next steps would be for this project.
So the main structure here at the Bvam School is closing in on 20 years old, and as you can imagine, it's nearing the end of its useful life. As you know, with anything, a car, a playground, the parts are getting harder to find. We had a small replacement of a part 2 years ago that ran us over $6,000.
The playground is the oldest playground of the elementary schools in the district. We have 508 students that we serve. The current playground is not inclusive. Playgrounds have changed over the years to be more inclusive. And right now the playground has two different levels. I don't know if you could see from the picture at the bottom, but on the left-hand side is a smaller structure that is used for kindergarten, first, second graders. And on the right side is a blue structure used for the third and fourth graders. With the two levels, it maybe doesn't sound like much, but it only allows the students to play in one structure right now. So if you can imagine 100 little students coming out to play on the playground, that means that only about 12 kids are fitting on one of these structures at a time, and that can be a safety issue as well.
So as Rachel said, this is the elementary school with the highest enrollment, and it's the only true playground in South Chelmsford, and it's directly located off the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail.
Okay, so what has been done so far? So far we've discussed the replacement with the DPW. I put together a project plan, a budget, and a timeline. We met with equipment companies to discuss what the options were. We met with 2 playground equipment companies, providers. We reviewed those proposals with the Bvam School Association, which is their PTO, and discussed the options, and then presented to the Community Preservation Committee, requesting some funds from the Community Preservation Fund. They did vote unanimously yes on that. So in terms of the scope, that's the work of the DPW, so Nick could tell you.
So if this article passes, the DPW is committed to doing some work there, leveling it to one area of play, taking down the 2 main structures and taking down the swings. We're hoping to complete this work before school starts next year, so we're hoping to get the bulk of the work done in July and August.
So the new equipment, obviously we wanted to make sure that it would fit the needs of all students, their interest levels, their abilities. We wanted to make sure it was a vendor who had a balance and had ADA compliant parts, that they have good customer service, that the parts would be available when we would need them if there are repairs needed. Compan is the company that we believe is the best to use for this project and would choose for this project, and they recently did the Harrington School playground updates. This new playground will be ADA compliant in terms of parts, and there will be standalone equipment as well for students. Here's a rendering of the playground. There, as you can see, are 2 main structures. There are a few individual structures as well, standalone play, that I'll show you on another slide as well. So they're very similar to, the big structures on a typical school playground. There are some standalone equipment as well. We find that a lot of students like to choose to play alone, not always in the fray with a bunch of children at once. So we would have a few pieces for those students, as well as some imaginative play structures. You see they're the small panels for the students to do imaginative play and music, and to allow them to have more options that way. You just see the different perspectives here. So In terms of the project budget, the playground overall costs, that would include the equipment, the delivery, installation, the engineered wood fiber, which is the mulch for the playground, all of the materials, everything including would be $152,000. Of that, the DPW is obviously making a donation of their time and labor as well to do the leveling of the playground. The BSA, which is the Bvam School Association, has $40,000 in funds to bring to this project, as well as additional savings that we might see with the recycling of the metal structures that are there now, and some additional fundraising that we're currently doing. So in total, we would be asking the town to release the funds of $75,000 from the Community Preservation Fund. That would be 49% of the cost. I know there's similar.
Yeah, so this is a similar size playground, slightly smaller than the Harrington School, and similar priced playground to other elementary schools in the district. So it's not that we're going anything larger. It's about, it'll accommodate the students it needs to accommodate.
So the next steps would be, if the town is to release the $75,000 in funds, we would order the equipment and schedule the installation, hoping to have the DPW break ground in July, with install by July, late July or August, to start for the new school year. Questions?
Thank you very much. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 22.
Board of Selectmen have a recommendation.
The Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval of Article 22.
Mr. Rood, does the Community Preservation have a recommendation? Yes. Thank you. Okay.
Beth Logan, Precinct 3. Please, could somebody explain? I thought when contracts were over a certain amount of money, it had to go out for bid, and we couldn't just pick the supplier and go with it. Am I incorrect on that? And if we are just picking and not going out for bid, how do we know we're being properly treated financially?
The equipment came, to you, Mr. Moderator, to the previous speaker, the equipment came off a state bid list.
Elaborate. Are you saying they don't have to?
The state has done the procurement.
Okay, so considering like a month and a half ago, there was a whole big thing that it wasn't done correctly in Boston schools on some of these. I think we might want to just make sure that we're doing it right and don't get in trouble later, since we've decided to pick somebody without a bid. Just saying.
I haven't asked you.
Explain the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has a state procurement division, Mass Combis, I guess is how it goes by, Commonwealth Purchasing. And they do a series of procurement for playground equipments to vehicles, to trash barrels, to recycling bins, to all types of state equipment. And basically what they do is they make that list available to the municipalities and other subdivisions of the state, school districts and so forth, in which they can then use the state's buying power to get a better price on the purchase of goods and services. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will Wagner, Precinct 8. So this was raised during Fall Town Meeting when the Rubbersfield Group came to get their playground funded as well. And I give you kudos for doing a significant amount of fundraising before coming to the town meeting, so thank you very much for that. However, as was raised then, the other schools, through their PTOs, basically funded their playground renovations pretty much entirely, if I'm correct, from what was said about the South Row Playground and other playgrounds. So I'm just curious as to what's changed in the process that you're coming to town meeting for $75,000 when the other schools have all done it on their own.
To use the moderator, the previous speaker. So this is the first time this fund has been used to fund a playground. The South Row didn't receive insurance proceeds from the fire at the playground, which I count as town funding. Additionally, the Harrington School was funded completely out of the modular classroom funding.
You can ask questions.
So basically, you're saying that previous schools have received funding through other kinds, and because of that,
This is a similar sized ask to what the South Row received in insurance proceeds.
This is the largest
okay, thank you.
of a PQ.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Christine Lindberg, Precinct 5. I have a son that's gone through Bvam. He's in 6th grade now at McCarthy, and I have a 2nd grader at Bvam. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the state of the playground. I don't know if people in this room are aware, but we are the center for autistic students, elementary students in town, and so we have a number of children at our school that have different levels of disabilities. And right now, it really is a tragedy that we have a playground that cannot service all of the children. It's a really big issue. And I know my own son comes home and says that certain kids cannot actually access the playground and play on it. He doesn't use those words, he uses different words because he's in 2nd grade. But I would really, really highly recommend that you vote this article through. This is really important for our school. Our school is growing a lot. We have a lot of building going on 110. We have a lot of new students. We have a lot of students with needs, and it's really, really important at this age that these kids have an inclusive playground to play on. All right, so I highly recommend that you vote for this. I'm a part of the BSA, so full disclosure, I'm a part of the BSA, and we've worked really, really hard to fundraise, and we'll continue to do that. We are not looking for you to fund the entire project, but as Nick stated, there are other schools that have had funds allocated for this. We're not asking for any more than the other schools have gotten. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Debbie Derry, Precinct 6. It's very interesting. We just passed a warrant article, $50,000 for playground equipment. And yet you're coming forward for another $75,000. And I'm wondering why we couldn't have just used the $50,000 that we just passed.
Mr. Moderator, to you, the previous speaker, that wasn't my understanding of the previous article. That was, if I understand correctly, that was designated to CPC open space funding.
I guess I'm a little
for recreational purposes.
I'd like really somebody to explain to me, because I still don't, I went and paid my tax bill on Monday. And I looked at my tax bill, and I looked at the...
Now, are you asking questions now, or are you...
No, I'm making a comment, because then from there, I'm going to lead to a question. As I was looking, I paid the tax bill on Monday, I looked at the breakdown of the money, and I looked at the fund that I spent, that I pay in a year, which happens to be $280,000 a year in that fund. And after Monday's night meeting, of the $245,000 that was required for the fire department to stay open, it made me wonder. I know when we raised it to 1.5%, which was on a ballot question because of the two large projects we had for the North Town Hall and the Center Town Hall, there was a reason. There was also 100% match by the state. We currently, if I remember correctly, listening to the other meetings, it's 35% that we're being matched by the state right now. I just heard that there really isn't enough money in that fund. That being said, how did we go from two large historical projects to turf fields and now playground equipment out of that account? Because when I've been here for 43 years, I don't even remember us doing this. Could somebody explain to me how we ended up doing playgrounds and turf fields out of this particular fund?
Mr. Manager?
Do my best. All community preservation projects have to go to town meeting for appropriation. And in order to get to town meeting, they need to have the positive recommendation of the Community Preservation Committee. So those projects that you mentioned, the town halls, the turf fields project, the Roberts Field Playground, all came before this representative town meeting for authorization and approval. No funds can be expended from the surcharge for community preservation except by town meeting vote. And those monies that are collected by the surcharge are only restricted to community preservation fund purposes.
That being said, when originally it was proposed at the very beginning, we were never told it was going to be used for turf fields, nor were we told it was going to be used for playground equipment. It was to purchase open space, to do historical. Maybe that's what I'm questioning, because now, every year that our tax levy is going up 2.5%, that amount is also going up. And it seems as though it's almost like a slush fund for people to come forward to ask for whatever. I know that the Westland schools, many years ago, that money was all raised by the parents of that school. And it goes back, what, a few years, but it was $25,000. And through magazines and a paper, whatever else was sold. It took many years, you know. So I'm starting to wonder about where we're spending this money.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Parley, Mr. Cohen. My name is Judy Carvin, Precinct 7. I'm also a member of the Community Preservation Committee, as is the esteemed Mr. Ed Rue.
Right.
And we're here to clear up some questions that seem to be swirling about the room. The Community Preservation Coalition was formulated through the Commonwealth of Massachusetts via people who were interested in preserving historic places, be it a house or a barn or a watering trough, to also collect funds for public housing, affordable housing. That's category number 2. Category number 3, in the beginning, was also for the open space, purchasing open space like the Red Wing Farm, the Sheehan Farm at the end of Pine Hill Road. That was purchased with money from the community preservation funds, all right? So the years go by, the communities, now not every single municipality in the Commonwealth, there were 351 of them, participates in community preservation surcharge. That has to go before the voters of every single municipality. It started out at 0.5% of the tax on your specific piece of property, and it's a formula. So you would take your assessed value, and the first thing you do is you take $100,000 right off the top. And then you multiply it by, right now we're at 1.5%. There might be another thing, it's been a few years since I heard that formula, but I think I'm in that ballpark. So that money goes into a special account, and it's a surcharge, it's not a tax. And it's a collection of money that was approved by the voters. It wasn't approved by us. It wasn't approved by the selectmen or the finance committee. It was approved by the voters. So we're moving along, and then a lot of the municipalities in the Commonwealth, and this is, I'm reiterating what the chairman of our committee, Linda Prescott, told me, that the larger municipalities, your cities, had plenty of, they were taking money, they had more money in their community preservation account, and they took care of their historic places, open space, housing, and they went to the Community Preservation Coalition on Beacon Hill and asked if they could use their funds for the improvement of existing active
recreation and also for passive recreation. So the coalition formulated a document, they presented it in a bill, they went to the Senate, they went to the House of Representatives, and Beacon Hill approved this. And this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So now the cities can use this money to renovate or replace playgrounds, public space for the children. It's a wonderful thing. So that's it. You have passive and active recreation. If your group is asking for more than $20,000 from the Community Preservation Committee, you come here. If you're looking for less, 20,000 or less, you need to come before our committee, and we can approve it or we cannot approve it. It's not, a total green light all the time.
Let me get a word in there. Let me get a word in edgewise. You're on a good roll. I'm the vice chair of the CPC. Basically, it's our standard practice, our long-term practice, that we only fund or recommend funding 50% of a project. So if you come to us for $100 grand, we would only look at funding 50,000. So that's why you see the request at the town meeting from the CPC for 75,000 on this project.
Thank you, Mr.
That's what I wanted to get in.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Thank you, yes. So that's where it stands. The schools,
Ms. Carvin?
yes, 5 minutes?
You spoke 5 minutes, and there's someone else waiting in line.
Lori Coolis, Precinct 6. I just have a question for you. I know that you had pictures of the playground or the proposed playground, and we're trying to make it an inclusive playground. Regarding the surfacing, who was consulted? I just want to make sure that we're picking the right surface.
Yeah, so the proposed surface is engineered wood fiber, similar to the other playgrounds in town, other than the South Row School, which is crumb rubber. This is an ADA compliant surface, requires some maintenance. So it's my understanding that the janitor is going to be going out there and raking out any ruts.
I guess I would just want to make sure that the school nurses and the physical therapists are consulted to make sure that wheelchairs can go on that surfacing. So I want to just be sure that we follow through with all the steps if you do get the funds today, because I really truly would want it to be an inclusive playground. And so it's very important to consult with.
I do believe the school nurse was consulted on this design.
Yep.
Okay. And the physical therapist, because they would know what equipment could go on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evelyn Thorne, Precinct 5. I would also like to remind the body that each of the playgrounds is open to the community, and when school is not in session. So during the summertime, there's many community members that do participate and frequent our playgrounds. So with our tax dollars, it also is servicing the whole community overall. And with Bvam School, it's several miles from that location to another location if you have small children or grandchildren that you want to have entertained during the day.
Thank you.
Kathy Tuberty, Precinct 1. Costs. Can you tell me, if you know, what the costs for Harrington were to Alcume, the cost for South Row, and to remind us again the cost for Friendship Park, please?
So there were some additional costs to the Harrington Playground that I don't know if the DPW director can speak to, but there was a hill that had to be leveled off with a retaining wall. But the Harrington Playground was approximately $160, and the South Row was approximately $110. And Roberts Field is $400, $450.
So I was involved in that 20-year ago thing. my children took full advantage, my neighbors have taken full advantage, you can start the clock, of the Bvam Park that was there. Then the whole neighborhood, and I can tell you kids from other towns of some, it's right off the bike path, so it's a really convenient place. And I encourage everybody here to if we could do this for Friendship Park because people use it there, I think that this is definitely a neighborhood park, but it's also a community park. It's great for our schools, but it's so much bigger than that, and I encourage you to take the time and energy to go check it out and vote for it here tonight. Thank you.
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. The surface we're seeing here is that wood chips? Is that what you said?
Engineered wood fiber is what it's called.
Engineered wood fiber, and it compresses, or is it a hard surface or is it a soft surface?
A soft surface. It has some attenuation to it. You're supposed to have 12 inches of it, and it'll compact over time, and you need to continue to add engineered wood fiber to it.
And has somebody pushed a wheelchair through 12 inches of this stuff? You said it was ADA compliant. I can tell you, you can't push a wheelchair through 12 inches of that stuff. ADA compliant, who said it was ADA compliant?
Our municipal insurance views it as ADA compliant.
Okay, could you check that out for me? We do have some kids in wheelchairs. And if you have some ADA devices in there, you may be better off with a rubberized surface, which is a significant amount of money, or you may have to put a pathway to it, because you cannot push a wheelchair through sand or material that compresses 12 inches.
With this surface, in future projects, if the PTO were to fundraise, this stuff is very easy to move to the side and put down the poured-in-place rubber, I believe is what you referred to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? There appear to be none. We will vote on Article 22 to appropriate $75,000 from the Community Preservation Fund General Reserve for the construction of a playground at the Bvam Elementary School. And the article passes 131 in favor, 3 opposed, no abstentions. We will now...
Thank you.
Article 23, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 23 is a transfer of town-owned land for conservation purposes. Periodically, the town comes into possession of town-owned lands, usually that are of low value, and usually through tax possession because they're of no benefit to the previous landowner. In this case, we have a 9.89 acre parcel of land located off of Technology Drive that we're proposing to be transferred for conservation. And to sort of orient you to where it's located, the edge of the parcel, which is the line that runs smooth on the right-hand side of the screen, is the City of Lowell boundary of Technology Drive. And so Technology Drive is at the bottom of the screen. Right now it's that vacant parcel right at the edge of town, and then it goes back, and then on the other side of the property ultimately is the UMass Lowell West Campus at the top left-hand corner, and then there's the subdivisions that are in there, the 55-plus housing. This parcel is wet. You can see the blue is water, and the shaded greens and such around it are wetland areas. And so obviously it has no development value, although interestingly it had an assessment of $30,800. The parcel was once part of all the Nordblum parcels that were part of Technology Drive, and obviously you can see water and such drains into that area from the adjoining parcels. So again, when the parcel came into possession for non-payment of taxes to the community, we reached out to the Conservation Commission, and the Conservation expressed interest of adding this parcel of wet land to its conservation inventory. So that's what's taking place under this article is the transfer of this property from technically the Board of Selectmen or general municipal purposes to the Conservation Commission for conservation purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 23.
Board of Selectmen have a recommendation.
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommend approval of Article 23.
And I'm in the 3rd District, and I live in Meadowwood, and I got asked a couple questions this week, and I can't answer them. How long has the town owned this property?
We just took possession of it since January
Why?
for non-payment of taxes. I'll ask John Souza, who's our treasurer collector and who handles our tax accounts, to sort of describe the process and to why we would take.
And then the other thing I'd like to know after he describes that, is anybody going to clean it up? Because there's a lot of people that are in there.
Mr. Moderator, to answer the previous speaker's question, the real estate taxes were unpaid on this parcel for fiscal year 13 through fiscal year 17, and the taxes ran about $560 or so per year. Generally, what happens when, as treasurer, when I do a tax taking and a lien is applied on a parcel like this, it generally can take 2 years or more for something like this to work its way through the land court. So in this case, it took a little longer than that, but the town is owed, the taxes for those years. So once the land court case gets resolved, we receive what's called a judgment or from the land court or a foreclosure. Essentially, the town then takes ownership of this because the former owner neglected to pay their taxes for those amount of years. And the court does give them party the right to come in and pay us. If they wanted to redeem this, they could come in. I would then appear before the selectmen, and the former owner would have the legal right to pay the town what's owed, and then essentially we would vacate or reverse the foreclosure if they wanted to do so, but they expressed no interest in doing so. And that happened, the town received the foreclosure judgment in January of 2018.
To go to your other point, if the property would then be transferred to the care, custody, and control of the Conservation Commission, and then they would be the ones who would oversee activity on the land, including removal of any debris or other unwanted materials that may be out there that present a hazard to the wetland environment.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Doug Bruce, Precinct 9. Question I have is whether or not the town would be assuming any liability that may be present with this property with respect to hazardous waste or any cleanup or anything like that, such as we did with respect to the Katrina Road property a few years ago.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the town taking ownership of the property does not release any prior owners from any environmental damage or contamination to the property that may have taken place. That chain of custody would remain. However, we're not aware of any such environmental threat located at this site.
Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Thank you. Any other questions, concerns? Okay. There being none, we will now vote on Article 23 to transfer the care, custody, management, and control of the property on Technology Drive to the Conservation Commission. Wow. The article passes 131 in favor, 1 opposed, no abstentions. We will now move to Article 24.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 24 is the second and final parcel dealing with the transfer of land owned by the town. In this case, we have a parcel of land containing 1.72 acres located off of Oak Hill Road. And again, this land, as you'll see in the map coming up, directly abuts the Oak Hill conservation land. And the request came from the Conservation Commission a few months ago to transfer this 1.72 acre parcel to the conservation because it does expand that conservation corridor. So what you can see, the shaded area in the blue box to the lower center of the parcel is the parcel, and then all the land underneath it is the Oak Hill conservation land. So that's what's being requested here, is to expand the conservation corridor with this property. The assessed value on this parcel of land was only $2,100. So that's what's taking place under this article. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Finance Committee have a recommendation.
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 24.
And the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation.
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval of Article 24.
Questions, comments?
Mr. Moderator, Dennis Sheehan, Precinct 4. Is there anyone here from perhaps Conservation Commission that could give us an update on the Oak Hill, a brief update, like regarding the general access, the trails and parking lot and stuff that's going on?
That, I think, would be beyond the scope of this article, unless the town manager says that it's going to be impacted by the acquisition of this parcel. Is access to Oak Hill going to be affected?
No, this is not to provide an access corridor. The access to Oak Hill would still remain off of Swain Road.
So, Mr. Sheehan, I believe that you probably could contact the Conservation Commission directly, and they can advise you.
Okay, so no one could speak to, what we've got right now, is the parking lot in, that sort of thing?
You certainly can ask if there's going to be an intention to put a parking lot there.
No, there's no intention to use. In fact, most of this parcel, as shown on the plan, is wet. You can see the land around it, all that. You can see the blue is the brook that runs through it, the stream that runs through it, and the green shaded area is wetland. So no, there is no possibility of development on this parcel.
The question was, the Oak Hill property, there was some discussion about some sort of parking and access.
And that's all been constructed and
That's all
completed.
done?
That's all completed, yes.
Thank you.
Right by the Swain Road, the old landfill entrance or DPW salt shed, all that parking and signage and trail access has all been completed.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any comments? There being none, this again will require a 2/3 vote to to transfer 1.72 acres located off of Oak Hill Road to the Conservation Commission for conservation purposes. The article passes unanimously. Article 25.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 25 is a transition now. We're now moving to zoning bylaw amendments. The first zoning bylaw article is brought forth by the Planning Board pertaining to the CO8 Overlay District, and I'm going to turn the podium over to Evan Belansky, our Community Development Director. You can make the presentation then after.
Okay. Good evening. So Article 25 is a housekeeping item for purposes of clarifying the legislative intent related to a conflict between two zoning bylaws, both of which this body approved. So for summary, those two bylaws that are the subject of this housekeeping amendment, the first one is the COID bylaw. That was approved by town meeting in 2013. That bylaw specifically permits multifamily in all commercial zoning districts, but prohibits multifamily in any limited industrial IA zoning district. The next bylaw was approved by town meeting in 2016. That is the Route 129 Business Amenity Overlay District. That bylaw specifically permitted multifamily within the Route 129 Limited Industrial IA zoning district as part of the live, work, play vision. This particular Article 25 clarifies that multifamily is only permitted within the Route 129 Business Amenity Overlay District and not any other limited industrial zoning district in any other part of town. This particular conflict was identified during a recent project review. Town council had recommended that the planning board pursue clarification of this conflict. The planning board has held public hearings on this proposed zoning amendment and did recommend approval.
Thank you very much. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 25.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval of Article 25.
Does the Planning Board have a recommendation?
Yes, after a properly noticed public hearing on February 14th of this year, the Planning Board voted unanimously to recommend approval.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions or discussion? There appear to be none, so we will now vote. This requires a 2/3 vote on Article 25. Up. Christine, you gotta... What?
A comment?
Yes, you can make a comment. I just...
Well, you said question. I didn't want to.
No, questions and comments are all
Okay.
together.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Moderator, Evan, and Mr. Town Manager. I just have a few comments I'd like to bring to the attention of all the town reps. One is that the use regulation schedule, which is within the zoning articles as an attachment, prohibits multifamily dwellings in the IA commercial district. The CEIOD and BAOD projects are subject to the use regulation schedule, and that also the intent of the CEIOD is to exclude multifamily projects in the IA. Now, that last part about the intent of the CEIOD to exclude multifamily in the IA commercial district comes from page 11 of the 2017 Affordable Housing Plan. I just wanted to bring that to the attention of this body. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
George Zaharoulis, Precinct 3, former planning board member. I sat on both overlays. The overlay allows you within them to create residential uses in other districts. It's just like the village overlay that we've had for years, and it's something that we've done to enhance these districts and provide more housing, live, work, and play. So these overlays, the CEIOD was first, and then the BAOD, the 129 overlay, came second. It was clear in the overlay, the BAOD, that we would allow residential within that district. It was just a wording conflict because one overlay was done prior. We sought town council's opinion, and town council told us that it's pretty clear that when one said no and the other one was after it, then allowed it, it's allowed. And that's the way we should view it. So this is just to clean up the language. Yes, we have use tables, but the overlay district allows to go beyond and above and beyond those use tables. I urge you to vote in favor of this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Or questions and comments? There appear to be none. So we'll now vote on Article 25. This again requires a 2/3 vote to clarify some conflicts in some of the zoning bylaw language. And the article passes 126 in favor, 9 opposed, and 1 abstention. Now we have Article 26.
Mr. Moderator, Article 26 is the second and final zoning bylaw on the spring annual town meeting warrant. This is submitted by citizen petition by Christine Bowman, the Precinct 4 representative, and Brian Latina, Precinct 4 representative.
Good evening. This warrant article is to set the multifamily housing projects in the BAOD exclusion zone to be a known and reasonable density. Right now, the sky's the limit. The planning board is responsible for deciding how many units per acre can be put in this buffer zone as described when we voted in the 2016 overlay district vote, the BAOD as it's so called. Chelmsford policy documents support this in the 2010 master plan and the 2011 affordable housing plan. What you think you voted for in the fall of 2016 is a commercial revitalization bylaw with a multifamily buffer zone. That's as it was described. We all paid attention to the 6-story buildings that we were trying to allow in that current 3-story building zone to try to revitalize our town and to generate more tax revenue. We protected the single-family housing along Turnpike and Mill Road and Billerica Road by putting in what was being described as a buffer zone or a commercial exclusion zone. What you voted for in theory, was a zoning change that reduces our future residential tax burden. That's what you think you got. The reality is, we voted in a multifamily buffer zone with no density standard or clear discussion. The planning board stated recently that they will approve 30 or more acres per unit. In fact, at one point, they laughed and said maybe as many as 50 units per acre. Recently, they approved 19 units per acre, and they just cleared a 9-acre parcel of forest that's been there for probably 60 years because of that project. So I want to do a little clarification here. The article only pertains to multifamily residential developments in the buffer zone along Turnpike, Mill Road, and Billerica Roads. Mixed-use buildings in the BAOD are not affected in any way. Mixed-use buildings are the ones we described as 6-story buildings along 129 and Route 3. Talk about putting those in by right. That means if a developer comes in or Amazon decides to come in, I think we can put as many as 9 6-story buildings by right without even coming to the planning board for a special permit. They could even have buildings 10 or 12 stories in there if they like and put residential on top of that. This bylaw change that we're requesting tonight from you folks is to say whatever you do over there is fine, but the buffer zone, as it was described along Turnpike, Mill, and Billerica Road, needs to buffer between that commercial zone and those single-family houses where residents live today. Single-family house should not have a 5 or 6-story residential property directly across the street when they're used to seeing a pine forest there. So the solution here is to create the bylaws must have a definitive standard for the planning board to follow. Vote for this article and standardize this multifamily buffer zone developments with a density of 4 to 6 units per acre within our RM districts, our RM standards. This is what we have around town now. Multifamily is 4 to 6 units per acre. Most of our single-family homes are either on 1 acre or half an acre. What we're describing here is pretty city-like, even at 4 to 6 units per acre. What you see along the side of the highways along Route 193, down in Billerica, and over in Andover, those are the kind of huge building projects that have no place across the street from single-family housing. So this is simply to try to set the standards so the planning board doesn't inadvertently get excited and try to stick in a bunch of more buildings in there. So the warrant article is as stated here. It's been amended from your books. And have any? Okay. I don't think so. So I'm finished with the presentation. I urge you to vote yes on this to limit the development.
Now, Mr. Latina, now you're arguing from that podium. When you urge them to vote for something, you've made your presentation and that was fine. And if you want to go to the microphone and urge their vote, you can certainly do that. But I've made it very clear that you cannot argue from...
Ready for questions. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you. Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation on this article? Oh, Finance Committee, I'm sorry. I'm looking at Jim Clancy and I'm saying Board of Selectmen.
No, thank you. The Finance Committee unanimously recommends against approval of Article 26.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
The Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends against approval of Article 26.
And does the Planning Board have a recommendation?
Yes, we do. After a properly noticed public hearing on February 14th, continued to February 28th, and again to March 14th, the Planning Board voted unanimously to recommend against this article.
Thank you. Now questions and debate.
Will Wagner, Precinct 8. I have a question for Town Council. The wording of this article, is this clear enough so that if it went in, it would not negatively, it would not impact the plans for 129 as a commercial, industrial, and mixed family district?
Mr. Chairman, through you to the previous speaker, I'm not sure I'm clear on what the nature of your question was. Is that a policy question or is that a legal question?
It's a question of the wording of this article. If this article was to go into our, the bylaws update regarding the overlay district, would the wording of this article be sufficient, or would there potentially be confusion on the wording of this article that would affect the overlay?
So, Mr. Chairman, again, through you to the previous speaker, I have concerns with the way this warrant article is drafted, not so much with regards to how future development in the zoning district would be impacted for the overlay district, because I think that's a policy issue that the Planning Board certainly can discuss. I do have concerns with the portions of this article that address either existing or proposed uses in the industrial zone in the attempt to subject them to the height and number of stories requirements for the RM zoning district. I don't think that is appropriate. I do not think that that would be accepted by the Attorney General's office when we submit the bylaws to them, because again, this is an overlay district and you should not be changing the underlying requirements of a different zoning district through an overlay district provision.
Thank you for hearing the question behind my confused words.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, through you to the presenters. If you use the previous planning master plan as evidence that this is an important thing, why would that plan not be sufficient going forward? Why do you feel the need to put this as an actual bylaw?
Part of the reason for that was the 104 Turnpike Road project. That project was in our 2011 affordable housing plan for the three properties there, 84, 86, and 104 Turnpike Road, I believe 19 acres for 120 units. This project came in on just one of those parcels, and they put 168 units of commercial grade high-end apartment complex type buildings on just 9 acres. So our concern was that we need to rope this in and understand the standard along that so-called exclusion zone. So we had experience over the summer where we had concerns and the neighbors had concerns that it really wasn't a buffer zone. It was a commercial residential zone that had no standard.
Thank you. So just to conclude my time at the microphone here, I'd just like to say that given the input from town council and the input from the finance committee, the selectmen, and the planning board, I recommend voting against this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Moderators. Tracy Cole, 97 Turnpike Road. I basically had a question for the Finance Committee. I wanted to know if you could clarify when you wrote in your thing, you said, as presented the warrant, the language has unintentional consequences of negativity impacting. Can you explain that statement, what you mean by unintentional negative impact?
I think to answer that question, town council has partially addressed it. There are other parts of the zoning bylaw that will be affected by the introduction of this amendment to the overlay district. And when this amendment's made to the overlay district, it'll have a unintentional consequence of changing some of the definitions on the other parts of the zoning bylaw.
Okay, well, this, from what I can tell, this amendment isn't being applied to the entire overlay district. It's specifically to the buffer zone that they're calling a buffer zone along Turnpike, and so it wouldn't have any impact on commercial buildings in the entire BAOD. Am I wrong in that?
Well, I think, and I think members of the planning board are also in line to address that. It changes the definition of multifamily, and by bringing in different parts and referencing different aspects of the zoning bylaw in this amendment, it's going to affect definitions outside of this specific amendment. I would also just like to state that the amendments being presented up there is not what was presented in the warrant article as well, so it's been changed further since what we have addressed.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure that answers my question.
Would you like town council to address it?
He can, if he can, like, make me understand, because
Well, I don't know if he can do that. I mean,
I don't know if anybody can do that, but the way I see this is this specific article only pertains, as far as what I can tell, to what they're calling a buffer zone or exclusion zone, where the only thing in that zone that's allowed is multifamily residential housing. So if this is, and it says that it's restrictive to these areas along Turnpike Mill and Billrica Road, so why would other companies in the BAOD be concerned? And this wouldn't have any effect on other multifamily residential areas in the town, correct? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, was that question to me?
Yeah, maybe you can help me out.
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, the last sentence of the amended warrant article states all commercial activity within the BAOD multifamily zone, current and future, is restricted to the RM maximum height of 35 feet and maximum RM stories of 3 stories in this multifamily zone for an effective buffer zone or an act in relation thereto. My understanding is that a significant portion of this overlay zoning district is actually located within the IA zone, and the IA zoning district requirements for number of stories is 4 stories, and the IA zone requirement for height is 45 feet. So this would, perhaps inadvertently, however, it would impact development within the entirety of the IA zoning district that is subject to the BAOD. Does that help?
So, that being said, if the commercial aspect of this was taken out completely, would everybody still have a problem with it?
Well, now you're asking if everybody in the
Well,
room might have a
I'm-
problem. I don't know if they have a problem with it now.
Primarily the boards, like the financial committee and the BOS and that.
Here's the problem that
Is that too general of a question?
And I'm not saying there's a problem with the article, but there's a problem with your question. The Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen, and the Planning Board did not have the amended version when they analyzed this. So perhaps I was in error when I asked them if they had a recommendation on the warrant article, and it was unclear.
Okay.
So what they analyzed was different than what you're being asked to vote on. And town council has tried to explain to everybody what this means.
But the article's out of order then.
I'm sorry?
The article's out of order, because it's not part of the scope of the original article.
Well, that's a question that yes. Now wait a second. You're out of order because you're not at the microphone. But to address the concern that has been raised, town council will explain.
So, Mr. Chairman, through you to the previous speaker, I did look at that issue. I did have some concern whether or not the amendment was within the scope of what was originally proposed. But the reduction in the number of acres required from 5 acres to 3 acres is less restrictive. The original provision that was submitted would have essentially banned any commercial use within the BAOD, which would impact the underlying zone. So removing that actually made it less restrictive rather than more restrictive. And there was also a provision previously that limited the height to only existing buildings and only at that existing height. So the change, even though I have concerns with the new height restrictions, are less restrictive than what was originally proposed. So I do feel that this is within the scope of what was originally proposed, even though I still have concerns.
Okay. So as a comment, I just want to say that I think, as far as I know, there's no other overlay or bylaw that does not have limits on any housing. Every other bylaw has limits on housing restrictions for building, except this one. Basically, this gives the planning board carte blanche to do pretty much whatever they want and build as big as they want, which is not consistent with what the residents of the area have been told, as this is going to be a buffer zone for the neighborhood and between the neighborhood and the industrial area. That's what we were all told, and that's what we were assured was going to happen. And I think this article is trying to make that happen. I believe that's what the town meeting reps were also told, from what I was told from them. So it might need a little bit of adjusting. Somebody might want to recommend or, an adjustment or an amendment to this. But I think this is something that you guys should seriously consider voting on to give the residents what they were promised, give the people in the town what they were promised when this was originally posted last year at the fall meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. I did notice that this was a significantly changed article. May I ask, Mr. Moderator, through you to the town council, I counted 4 changes that you referenced in here. When did you receive these changes, and how many are there actually in this?
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, I received the proposed amendment probably about 15 or 20 minutes before the town meeting began tonight.
I'm sorry, could you say that a little bit louder? When did
Approximately
you
15 or 20 minutes before.
15 or 20 minutes
tonight.
before the beginning of the meeting. And how many changes do you see in this here? I counted 4 in your representation.
Yeah, I would say those were the main changes that I thought were of substance. I'm not really sure how you would quantify exactly what the changes are. There was provisions that were removed and there were provisions that were exchanged.
Mr. Moderator, when do we enter the conversation part of this, the debate? Does that come later?
No, you can just let me know and I'll start the clock.
Start the clock.
Thank you.
So I have a big problem with seeing an article that has been reviewed by nobody on the Finance Committee or the Board of Selectmen or the Planning Board that was submitted 15 minutes before the meeting. I had thought I understood what was in the book, and I'm pretty sure I understood what I voted for when we set this district up. So I'm not in favor of voting for these changes here at the last moment without a review by a dozen or more town officials and getting their opinion on the adjustments here, even though they seem like they might be de minimization of the original article. It's just, I feel improper to town meeting to get this change of an article at this late point in time, and I do have a problem with the nature of the presentation saying that we didn't know what we were voting for and we need to correct our mistakes. I was pretty sure what I voted for in the fall.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, my name is Richard Stander. I live on 153 Turnpike Road. I support this article because I feel that this is a safety valve, if you will, sort of like having a speed limit on our roads. And I've seen a lot of development on Turnpike Road, and it will impact the neighborhood, I have no doubt. Across the street from me is a single-family home, 31,000 square feet, and initial efforts were to put 9 units on that property, and there were attempts to acquire an adjoining piece of property and increase that to 19 units right across the street from my single-family home. I found it very stressful, and I was concerned about the overdevelopment of the area, and I am still concerned. So I feel that this article helps put the brakes on some of what I consider to be runaway development. And I feel that there should be, it's a common sense thing, to have a maximum density for the use of this property. And I don't see any problem in that. There may be developers or other interests that would feel differently than me, but as a homeowner, I've lived there since 1987, I am concerned that the whole area is going to be built up to the point where a person who wants to have any kind of life, that they had up until all this development started, they're going to have to move out. Our neighborhood is being dramatically changed. So I support this, and I feel that as a common sense measure to help alleviate overdevelopment of the area and protect single-family homes. I mean, collectively in that Chelmsford, in that Turnpike Road area neighborhood, which was described as 140 single-family homes. During one of the planning board meetings, it was correct, it was supposed to be 114. But we're paying conservatively over $600,000 a year in real estate taxes, yet when we went through the process, I felt that my voice was not being heard and that other residents felt that their voices were not being heard, and we felt that there was a certain bias, like this was being forced upon us. So I feel that this is something to help protect the residents of the area and leave some reasonable standards to be met here. So we're concerned about overdevelopment, too much height. We already have one development that's ending at the hill on Mill Road. Now we have 104 Turnpike Road. The property across the street from me, I still don't know what the future holds for that property and what plans might be resurrected. So as a resident, I'm very concerned about runaway development in this area and so close to single-family homes. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Henry Parley, Precinct 7, Planning Board member. Just a couple quick clarifications. when we were talking about this district, we went back and forth. 50 units was never considered per acre. We may have talked about how much could you possibly put. 40 maybe came up, but the town would never accept it. Our limit's pretty close to 20. Now, the 102 Turnpike Road was brought in front of us by 40B developers. We were trying to take and soften the 40B. We were gonna get a development no matter what. It was owned by people that wanted to sell the property. It was gonna be sold. It was gonna be a large residential property. We did the best we could to hold it back. There's smaller buildings in the front, larger buildings in the back. They have interior air conditioning. We have really good landscaping going in. We really tried to soften the 40B blow that was coming. As far as Mill Road project, it's a 40B. We have nothing to do with it. There have been a lot of a lot of things said that are not correct. This is an industrial zoned area. Everything is an overlay on top of it. The industrial zoning, as far as the planning board is concerned, does not go away. Any of these properties along this area could be a trucking terminal, could be a lot of different things. There is a lot of opportunity for development. We are going to get a better handle on it because now we're getting closer to the 10%. I got planning board members behind me that got more things to say. I'm done. Less than 5 minutes.
Thank you very much.
George Zaharos, Precinct 3, former planning board member. When the Route 129 overlay district came before this board, I was one of the presenters. One of the things we presented was a map as part of the overlay district. On the map is an area that's outlined in orange. There's a key at the bottom. There's also a black outline. Black outline area says perimeter boundary of the overlay district. The orange line says outlined areas are commercial exclusion zones. The purpose of those zones was not to allow amenity-type zoning within those areas in the IA district. The amenity-type zoning would be a fast food restaurant or a restaurant, a dry cleaners, a bank, things that are not allowed in the IA district. We didn't want to have a restaurant across the street from, or in those areas from residential neighborhoods. That's what was presented to this body. So the buffer zone is not residential zone. Can you put the language back up, please, on the screen? Mm-hmm. The last line says, all commercial activity in the RM area. So there is no RM area within this overlay. RM is a separate zoning district within our town. It allows 8 units per acre, as well as it has some other allowances within it. The 4 to 6 units that you see here, I try to figure out where it came from. And there's a reference to the housing production plan. And in the housing production plan, which is a reference, there was one planning board member on that committee. It's a reference guide for future housing and how we can meet our housing inventory. It's a state mandated document. And in that document calls for a couple of recommendations. And one of them is to create new RM low density districts. Well, we're not creating a district here. The district already exists in IA. The other recommendation in the housing production plan, right before that one, it says that the RM zoning, there's 0 buildable area in RM zoning left in our town. The recommendation before that in the housing production plan says that the planning board should consider creating more RM zoning with a 5-acre minimum area. Not lot, but area. So that is in the housing production plan. It's not in our bylaw. That's only a recommendation. The 6 stories that you heard earlier are in a defined area close to Route 3. It's not all of the district. It's in a defined area for commercial building. So don't be fooled that we're going to create 6 stories all over the place. The other thing is, I was chair last year And when this came up, I brought it before the planning board for discussion. The planning board had a discussion. Some of us went out and looked at other developments throughout the town to see what the densities are. We found a lot of developments in town that were somewhere between 17 to 24 units per acre. This development is 18 or 19 units per acre. So it's not out of the scope or realm of what other developments are within the town. So we try to work hard to try to come up with good projects within this town. There was a discussion and people were passionate, and we talked about whether we should try to do something with it, leave it alone. There was a mention of, well, it could be 30 units per acre, and some of us cringed. There was no vote by the planning board to say we want 30 units per acre or 40 units per acre. There was no vote. There was discussion. We felt the way that the overlay was written works. The planning board will do their due diligence, even without me there, to make sure that this town is protected. And I have faith in the 7 members that are on that board. Thank you very much. I urge you to vote against this article.
Thank you. Yes.
Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1, and also a planning board member. So the issues that I have with this warrant article, this article replaces a subclause that says the following uses are permitted by special permit. 1, multifamily shall be subject to the COID. This replaces that. Why is that an issue? Because the original article is the permissivity to put housing in the entire BAOD. By replacing that existing article with this proposal, you are eliminating all housing except in the areas that are being discussed. So that whole concept that you voted on last time to have live, work, play in the Route 129 corridor goes away. Now, besides that, I'm opposed to it because it adds ambiguity. As much as the presenters wished us to believe that it was locking things down, the first problem is that it addresses transitional zones between residential neighborhoods and commercial districts. There are no commercial districts in the BAOD. It's an industrial district. What's it apply to? I don't know. What's a residential neighborhood? I understand what a residential district is, but we've got non-conforming housing scattered around in the BAOD. Does this apply to that existing non-conforming, the leftovers? Does this mean that we now have some sort of buffer zones around them? So that's a lot more of the BAOD that doesn't become usable at all. The next problem I have with it is the last line in terms of what else can be built there. Well, this is an overlay, and an overlay doesn't modify the underlying district. The underlying district is industrial, and by right, property owners can build per the underlying IA standards in that district, period. So, more ambiguity. I could go on and on, but you don't need me to.
Thank you.
John Edward, Precinct 5, representing the Housing Advisory Board. You can start the clock. I'm here tonight to read a letter to you that was written and unanimously approved by the Housing Advisory Board to the town meeting representatives. The Housing Advisory Board urges you to vote no on Article 26. Article 26 would undo essential benefits of the Business Amenities Overlay District. Article 26, in effect, rejects the notion that we as a community need to progress and need to provide for our residents. We will restrict our arguments to the damaging impact the proposed article would have on housing. The inclusionary housing bylaw that town meeting overwhelmingly approved in 2015 was necessary to counteract exclusionary zoning that made it very difficult to produce much-needed housing units. The Business Amenities Overlay District, overwhelmingly approved by town meeting in 2016, supports amenities that will promote economic development. In recognition of the vital need for workforce housing, the bylaw specifically identifies multifamily housing as an amenity. In recognition of the ongoing critical need for affordable housing, housing developments were declared subject to the inclusionary housing bylaw. While only enforced for a short time, the Business Amenities Overlay District has already demonstrated success. The article before you tonight would subvert the zoning strategy. With respect to housing, it would render the bylaws you approved ineffective. Article 26 would reintroduce the exclusionary zoning restrictions that encouraged Chapter 40B developments all over town, and that continue to make it difficult to meet the housing needs of Chelmsford residents for senior housing, for affordable housing, and for workforce housing. The submitters of this article have misapplied a, quote, multifamily zone density criteria, end quote, attributed to the housing production plan. The housing production plan very clearly states that this criterion provides guidance specifically for unplanned production, that is 40B projects proposed on non-targeted sites. Zoning strategies are by definition planned. After many years of struggle and controversy, the town of Chelmsford has recently made significant progress on adding to our subsidized housing inventory. Quite a few affordable units are occupied or under construction, while others have been approved. However, much progress must still be made on meeting the housing needs of the community. Article 26 represents a major step backwards and should be rejected. Let me ask, since I have 2 minutes and 25 seconds, just let me add one more point. The presentation tonight staked the claim that this article is supported by town planning documents, specifically the master plan and the affordable housing plan, but the reality is that those plans actually provide ample support for the zoning strategies that this warrant article is intended to subvert. And also, there was citations of the 2011 Affordable Housing Plan, which is no longer the housing plan in force in Chelmsford. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. Earlier this year, I attended many planning board meetings, and I have to tell you, I'm very disappointed in the activities that I was seeing and in the documentation that we were able to very carefully read. One of our residents came to us very concerned, and I got very concerned when the first project for a commercial project overlay district turned out to be cutting down 9 acres of forest at the end of Warren Avenue to put up 4 four-story buildings, 2 of them with a garage underneath, requiring dirt to be removed. I noticed they waited until after our town election to start cutting the trees down. Normally you would cut trees down in the wintertime when the ground's frozen. I thought that was a little odd. They cut a bunch more in the last couple of days. They trimmed around to make it look less terrible. I was suggested that I table this warrant article because we don't have the 2/3 vote necessary. About 85 of you need to vote yes on this if we want to pass it and correct the mistake that we made while we were paying attention to Route 3. We forgot about all the residents on Turnpike Road. The Finance Committee had a discussion about the previous article. We simply amended this. Town meeting can amend articles. You don't have to come in here knowing everything about these things. We make mistakes in town meeting, and I believe that we made a mistake when we voted on this, paying attention to what was happening on Route 3 without attending to the buffer zone that I personally was told and was really surprised about. If you'd move that map forward for me, please. One click forward. There's a yellow zone along there you can barely see, and that big blob in the middle of the Turnpike Road is Stonegate. Stonegate has 62 high-density housing units. There's 40 kids in there. This project is a little bit north of that. You can find it if you drive on Turnpike and look where the trucks are coming out. That's the 9-acre pine forest that used to be there. 168 units, 345 parking spaces, 1,100 new cars on Turnpike. You know how many 1,100 cars is? Anybody get on 495 from Route 3 to 110? Dead stop both sides. That's how many 1,100 cars is. That plus 1,100 cars because of the project that they put on the top of the hill on Mill Road. How many kids are going to come out of that program? We're chastised for using that factor. Stonegate ratio of children to housing units makes this project, the one at the center of Turnpike, worth about $1 million worth of education costs to us every year, but it only generates about $500,000 of tax revenue. The first project shouldn't have been residential, it should have been commercial. The second project, the planning board on, I believe it was August 9th, you won't find the minutes, it's not published. You won't find it on TV, but you will see all the other ones. Anything you think we said wrong, go look at the planning board YouTube videos. Go look at the finance videos and read our documents. The first time in my life I read through HPP, the 2011 housing plan. All these documents are linked together and they do mean something. They tie together and they set the standard for how we expect our properties and the adjacent properties to be taken care of and our areas to be protected. And I have to tell you one other thing. I didn't want to say it because we don't have all the facts yet. These are industrial zones. We're about to put housing on an industrial zone. There was a question about hazmat on an area that we were picking up.
1 minute, Mr. Latino.
We have current positive hazardous material reporting on one of the properties that was designated for a 40B within several hundred yards of this property. And if you start digging it up and putting a garage under it, I'm going to guess there's a risk that you will extend those chemicals. And we will provide that with you as soon as the Department of Environmental Protection finds the proper results. I'm very concerned that we don't have any standard for how many units per acre along this property. And we better start paying attention. Next town meeting, you'll have a chance to see 168 units and what that looks like. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Town Moderator, over here. Hi, I would like to state some clarification points.
There's no question before you, so it sounds like you're arguing.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Hi, Ken LaFave. I'm Precinct 6, also a Board of Selectmen member, and I am the liaison to the Planning Board. So for most of you who don't know, last year I was elected. It was my real first foray into town politics, and I started attending the Planning Board meetings and really went into it kind of skeptical. And like most people who don't get involved in town, you hear things on Facebook and you see and you scratch your head. So I got involved and I went in and I thought this is really going to be interesting. And what I found as I sat through these meetings, and several that I went to I was the only guy in the room by the end of the night, and it was kind of amazing to me how few people show up and pay attention to a lot of this stuff. But what I learned in the last year was that we have a very educated, very smart, very cautious, very detailed planning board. And they're elected, they ran unopposed, so they got to be doing a good job. So I ask tonight that you support them.
Thank you.
Sam Polton, Precinct 8. I heard a very sensible thing that was kind of lost. Very, very difficult to vote on something that's changed 5 minutes before before our town meeting. So I'd move we table this until the next town meeting that discusses articles of this category. So that's my motion.
Okay. So we have a motion to table the article. That is a priority motion. So basically what's going to happen is you're going to vote. If you vote in the affirmative, this article is being tabled and will not be allowed to be heard this session. If you vote no, then we're back.
Mr. Moderator.
Yes.
Discussion on the motion?
Yes, you can have discussion on the motion.
I'd like to urge the body to vote no on the motion and then furthermore vote no on the question afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.
You could trot back there and talk about this. Well, yes, we want to table it. We do not have it. No.
So we have a pending motion. And do we have a screen so that people can vote on the pending motion?
2010, no, 2012.
You have to come to the microphone?
It's not debatable?
Oh, it's not? Okay.
It's either yes or no.
Well, I would prefer that we actually have a vote that. Yes. Okay. We do need a second, by the way, on the motion to vote. Okay, we have a second. So.
Mr. Moderator, are we allowed to speak to the motion?
No, I've just
That's
read
okay.
that it is not a debatable motion.
I understand. It was a question, Mr. Moderator.
And
That's all.
I'm answering your question.
Point of order, Mr.
Thank you.
Moderator.
Yes.
Point of order, Mr. Moderator. You did allow someone to speak on the motion.
And that was my error.
Where that happened,
No. I made a mistake. I'm not going to make two. Okay? So the matter before is a motion to table. All in favor to table the motion, vote yes. All opposed, vote no.
Well, I'll do this next.
The motion to table fails. We're back on the original motion.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5, I'd like to move the question.
We have a motion to move the question. So a vote to move, a vote in the affirmative means that we will then vote on the question without further discussion or debate. Please vote now. Thank you.
hit your two button.
The motion to move the question has passed. Now we will be voting on Article 26. This does require a two-thirds vote. A vote in favor is to adopt the amended bylaw that was presented this evening.
So it looks like.
Oh, by a mile. It's the opposite.
Give it a shot.
The article fails. 26 in favor, 108 opposed, 3 abstentions. We will now move. The proponent of Article 27 has withdrawn the motion, just as my voice is withdrawing right now. We will then proceed to Article 28.
Mr. Moderator, Article 28 pertains to the town-owned property located at 101 Mill Road. This is a citizen petition article from Brian Latina.
Mr. Latina? Mr. Latina, this is your motion.
Okay. Good evening.
Yes? I don't know that yet.
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to introduce Joan Paley, a former resident of Chelmsford, and wish to have her be allowed to speak for this article.
Yes, can you please spell her name for the record?
My last name is Paley. That's P as in Peter, A-L-E-Y.
Okay, the town meeting has to vote to allow a non-resident to speak. So we're just going to do it by hands, just for the sake of expediency. All those in favor of allowing Ms. Paley to speak, please raise your... All those opposed? Passes. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, we have a property that's owned by the town, 101 Mill Road, so-called. We had a committee that spent about 2.5 years to try to determine what to use this property for. From a historic point of view, the property was owned by one of the original residents of town, a gentleman by the name of Sam Adams. The committee came to the town meeting after we were charged to do so, and we came up with one idea out of many and offered that to town meeting. And at the same time, we asked for a $20,000 grant from the town, if you will, to allow us to develop a business plan for a venue-style use of this property, rather than lose it to a developer or a 40B. Last year, Mrs. Paley came to me as a town meeting rep and asked if she might research the property, possibly buy the property, or find another use for it. So as a town meeting rep, one of our responsibilities is to represent our citizens and other people with articles like this one when there's a good idea. So I'd like you to listen to Mrs. Paley and allow her to present to you an idea for that property.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. I wish to thank you for allowing me to speak to present the idea and proposal for the use of the Adams House on Mill Road as an inn. And many thanks to Brian for working with me. We both are working to achieve the same goal. It is to save this historic Adams House. By saving, we mean to preserve the historical value of the house and at the same time allow that history to be enjoyed and experienced by many who could be guests at the inn or visiting the inn by residents of the town to enjoy the library/museum in one room of the inn. The front room facing the historic mill stream would be a perfect space. There, one could find historic documents, photos, artwork, and stories regarding the owners of the house, namely the Adams family. It could be called the Adams Country Inn of Chelmsford. And the definition of an inn is a dwelling in the country providing lodging and food for travelers. At this point, I would like to say that funding has been raised to pay for the cost of utilities for the house as needed, month by month, to allow us time to find someone who would purchase the house and operate it as an inn. There would be no cost to the town for these expenses. And time, we have asked to be allowed time until the fall town meeting. Either way, the house will be sold. We believe that an inn would benefit the town since it would be the only historic inn in town. It adds to the town's cherished treasures present since the founding of the town in 1655. As an inn, the size of the house is perfect. 5 bedrooms, most with bathrooms, a large kitchen, and dining room. From the front window, one sees the historic Mill Stream and Mill Pond. Land is abundant around the house for guests to explore and be reminded of the people who lived and played there. They can envision and maybe hear the sawmill, which operated near the pond from 1636 to 1899. The addition of the south side of the house is large enough to provide living accommodations for innkeepers. There's a large kitchen and a large room for storage and laundry. Over the kitchen is a bedroom, living room, and bathroom. This area would need very little restoration work. We do believe that renovation work of the house would be quite minimal. To bring the interior spaces back to its original condition means removing wood paneling in some of the rooms, fixing the finish of the walls, paint or wallpaper, removing the hung ceilings in the first floor rooms, finishing and painting the ceilings, sanding and refinishing the wide pine floorboards, adding fire and smoke alarms throughout. Some already exist. Adding a sprinkler system, providing handicap access where needed at the entrance of the house, and modifying the downstairs bathroom of 1 bedroom. There once were 4 chimneys and working fireplaces. It would be wonderful if these chimneys could be rebuilt, therefore bringing back the working of the 4 fireplaces, but the house do still exist. Some renovations would be required to comply with current codes. We would recommend that a handrail be added to the kitchen stairway leading to the basement. An inn would preserve and protect the house and ensure the town would not lose this historical treasure. Chelmsford, as you know, is dedicated and proudly embraces the protection and preservation of its history. What better way to bring life back to this house other than to restore it to its original 1800s condition, displaying its beauty and warmth. Travelers would seek out this historic inn to experience and enjoy this special time in history. What is most important and our main goal is that the historical value of the house will be saved and protected. The Adams Inn would represent the era of the 1800s, and this would be the only historic inn in town. The front room overlooking the Mill Stream would be a library museum. Many Chelmsford residents who remember the house from years back would visit Wright and tell their stories. In 2016, Gannap Design and Daigle Engineers observed the building. It was recommended that the heating system be replaced, but not a necessity. From a report done earlier, it was established that insulation does exist. We suggest that an exterior door be built in the laundry room next to the kitchen facing the road side of the addition to provide convenient access to the house for the innkeepers. The good news regarding the design and engineers report is that the building's construction is consistent with the period when it was built, and the original layout of the 4 rooms on the first and second floors remain essentially intact. The report is important because the original condition of the house is there and needs minimal work. At this point, I would like to say that this proposal and all the research done has become my work, my job. Other work which I do has been put aside so that I can devote most of my time to achieving the goal of saving this house. This information, which is presented now to you, the town representatives, will, I hope, see my dedication to this, an end result that this house will become an inn. Town will not have to pay for the expenses of this house for the months ahead. The funding for this has been raised, perhaps more than what is needed. Our family lived in the house for several years before it was sold by my grandfather in 1944. Eventually, we moved to 107 Mill Road, always having the Adams house in our sight. I believe that it is uncertain that any preservation restrictions written for this 200-year-old house would be followed if the house were sold to one or two families. Would there be a clause included with the sales agreement that the house would have to be inspected every such period of time? How would we know? Perhaps the historical value of the house could be lost. As a historical inn,
You have 1 minute, Ms. Paley.
Thank you. As a historical inn, the Adams Historical Inn of Chelmsford preserves the town's connection with one of the founding fathers of the country, President John Adams. Not all towns in the state can say this. This inn becomes a destination point by travelers and used in town as an educational forum about the history, beginnings of the town and the country. And most importantly, this house is on the Massachusetts Registry of Historical Homes. We work to have this house live on as a historical property. It brings history as it stands so majestically and strongly. To anyone who wishes to stay there or visit and be reminded of the town's dedication to preserving its history, this house should stand as a historical treasure connected to the site of the historical mill stream next door. They belong together.
Ms. Paley, I'm sorry, your time is up.
Okay, almost made it to the end. Thank you. Could I go through a couple of more lines?
You got one more paragraph?
Yep.
One more paragraph, go
Okay,
ahead.
good. Mr. Lloyd Green, in 1954, began the building of the mill stream, always inspired by the Adams House, its history and infamous occupants. Soon the mill stream will offer tours of the waterfall, grist mill, sawmill, and water wheel, which will produce electricity. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends against approval of Article 28.
Board of Selectmen have a recommendation.
The Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends against approval of Article 28.
Time for questions and debate.
Karen Utek, Precinct 5. Mr. Moderator, I would like someone to clarify what we're voting on here. I mean, this all sounds very lovely, but I don't understand. We already voted to approve the sale of this property. What is this article actually binding someone to? What's the purpose?
Town Council and I have asked the same question, to be candid, and I'll leave it up to him to explain it because I can't.
Could I explain?
So, Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, I did have correspondence with the proponent of this article, indicating that I thought it was of limited impact. So the actual substantive portion of this article says to see if the town will vote to approve the use of the historic Adams House at 101 Mill Road as an inn to be called the Historic Adams Country Inn of Chelmsford. I indicated that I do not read this to prohibit the town from using this for any other purpose, for prohibiting the town from selling for any other purpose. So I don't think that the impact is particularly great with regards to...
So essentially, we're just voting on whether we like the idea.
Essentially, it would specifically authorize this sort of use with regards to the property ownership. However, as I indicated also in my letter to the proponent, it does not necessarily, it absolutely does not change any zoning requirements with regards to
that was
site,
my follow-up
because
question.
this is not a zoning.
It's already
article.
zoned for this?
Right. So in my letter, I did indicate in a cursory review of the zoning requirements that it may fit under the definition of boarding house, and therefore it may be an allowed use currently, but that is an issue that would have to be determined at the appropriate time through a decision by the building inspector.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. Mike Raisbeck, Precinct 1. A question through you, Mr. Moderator, to our town council. Is there some interaction here, assuming that the town maintains ownership? And this would seem to imply that the town maintains ownership and simply authorizes the use. What's the impact with public bidding laws and such, insofar as the work that has been discussed would require?
So, Mr. Chairman, through you to the previous speaker, I don't read this as requiring the town to take any affirmative actions with regards to this, but if the town were to choose to make upgrades to this building, it would have to go through the proper channels.
Yeah, and there would, suppose a private party were to try to make these upgrades to the building, would those be subject to public bidding because it's a publicly owned property?
Mr. Chairman, through you to the previous speaker, presumptively, if that were to occur, it's either through a lease agreement or it's because the property has been sold to another party.
Okay.
Question for town council. You mentioned that it may be acceptable to use this as a boarding house in a residential area, as opposed to using it as a commercial property in a residential area. Is that, could you clarify the difference?
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, what I did was I took a quick look at what uses would be allowed and whether in what use category an inn could conceivably fall into. Given the limited number of rooms that would be involved, it was a potential that it could fit within the definition of a boarding house. But again, that ultimately is a determination for the building inspector at the point in time when someone actually comes for an occupancy permit for that use, or for a building permit to make changes to create that use.
So I understand that up to four unrelated people living in the same house is considered residential. But I was under the impression that if you were doing short-term rentals, that was considered commercial. Is that not the, am I mistaken in that understanding?
Again, Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, what I did was I looked to determine whether or not there was a provision for inns, and not seeing something specifically with regard to that, to determine if this was a use that could be allowed, what use category would it fit within? Okay. And that led to a potential use as a boarding house. But again, that determination is one for the building inspector to make, whether or not this fits within that definition.
Could you explain what a boarding house is?
I can certainly go to our bylaw and take a look at what we state with regard to that. I'm not sure if the term is actually defined in the bylaw. I'll have to take a look. Well, then we can certainly look that up.
Four or more unrelated people in the same house. Every two unmarried couples each have to get a boarding house permit. Tell me that happens. Never.
So a boarding house is defined as a building, whether residential or commercial, or any part thereof, in which lodging is provided by the owner or operator to more than 4 boarders. The boarding house must provide for shared common facilities consisting of either bathing or cooking, and therefore shall not contain individual dwelling units consisting of complete living facilities. Meals may or may not be provided. A dwelling unit where more than 4 unrelated individuals rent shall be considered a boarding house. A boarding house shall not be deemed a multifamily dwelling.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So I would, you can start the clock on me, and I'll be very brief. I would like to commend the sponsors of this article on all the work that they've done. It sounds like a lovely use of that property. I am concerned over the potential that it would require zoning approvals that it doesn't qualify for. And I'm really concerned over how it gets paid for.
Thank you.
Curtis Barton, Precinct 9. Turn on your 5 minutes, please.
It's on.
Thank you. I oppose this article for two reasons. Number one, I've actually read all those engineering reports. That building is not handicapped accessible. The restrooms aren't handicapped accessible. The stairways down to the basement are so small that it's difficult for people of normal size to fit in them. The new addition to the building that is sort of new is not usable as it is now. You can't get in it with handicapped accessible. It would cost a lot of money to put a lift in to be able to use the second floor. If you were to try to use the third floor, it gets much worse. If this, as written, seems to mean the town is going to do something, this town does not have that kind of money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will Wagner, Precinct 8. If I recall correctly, at the fall town meeting last year, the town voted to dispose of this property. What is the status of that disposal, if I could ask, Mr. Moderator, to you, perhaps to the town manager?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the Board of Selectmen held off on the disposition process in deference to the petitioner. So therefore, there's been no action in terms of doing an RFP to sell the property until the town meeting had a chance to weigh in on this request.
Okay, so based on the previous presentation by the committee, as I understand it, the town meeting opted that it would be too expensive to renovate the unit at all, basically throwing good money after bad, as it were. And I'm concerned with, even though the town council says this wouldn't it wouldn't require the town to do anything, we could still dispose of it or opt to use it or whatever. I'm concerned that this suggests that the town is going to invest money into it. And given the report of the previous committee, the amount of money that would be required to make this a functioning facility, whether it be an event facility, an inn, or what have you, would be significant. And I would urge the town to vote against this and urge the selectmen to dispose of the property as was initially voted on. I was originally against the disposal of the property, but after consideration, I approve of that, and I would really like to see this off of the town books. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn Diggs, 220 Wellman Avenue, Precinct 2, and member of the Board of Selectmen. I just want to clarify something. When this originally was brought before us, we were as confused as many people here are about what it was about. So I did an investigation and spoke to the building department, and apparently the way the property is now zoned, there is no reason that it cannot be a boarding house. But then the question was, well, what's the difference between a boarding house and an inn and a bed and breakfast? And the definition of a boarding house as presented basically says that it has some common areas, a common kitchen, a common living room, common bathroom, and so forth. And I spoke, so then it led me to the building inspector and asked him, what does he perceive? Because he's the one who would decide whether or not the property could be used as such. And he said, basically, he doesn't see any difference between any of them. So there is no reason why the property can be sold and that the new owner turn it into an inn or a bed and breakfast or a boarding house. So it seemed that the only part of this warrant article that really has some definition is that the name of it would have to be as the warrant says, and that's all. The town doesn't necessarily need to hold on to it. The new owner can make it an inn, but if you were to pass this, it would seem to suggest that the name would have to be as the warrant says, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, John Souza, 88 Carlisle Street, and by way of public disclosure, I work as Town Finance Director. I'd like to speak on this as a resident for a moment. I urge the body, I don't mean no disrespect towards the proponent. I know she's well-intentioned, but This body made a decision at a previous town meeting to authorize the Board of Selectmen to dispose of this property. To go back and look at the history of this, in November of 2014, town meeting voted a special town meeting to purchase this property for $490,000. Then in October of 2015, a proposal was made under an article to do a structural and building code analysis for another $7,000. If you look at the money that we've spent, and I go back to the first session of town meeting, what we heard a lot of Monday night was that we're struggling to afford to provide basic municipal services within the tax levy under the confines of Prop 2.5. We've now spent $490,000 plus $7,000 for the analysis. Last July, we wrote out a check to a separate insurance company for $4,000 because our regular insurance company won't cover this property under the same policy as all our schools and municipal buildings because it's vacant, it's not used for a town use. In 2 or 3 months, I'll be asked to write out another check for $4,000 to insure it for another fiscal year. I think town meetings made a decision in the past. I urge the body to move forward and allow the selectmen and the town manager to sell this property. If a private party wants to purchase this building and turn it into an inn or a boarding house, that's great, but let's not do it with public money. Thank you.
Good evening, Judy Carvin, Precinct 7. What he just said. Honestly, the municipality is not in the business of owning and operating a business. We are in the business of operating the municipality, period. We made this decision already. It's done. Thank you very much, everyone, for being so smart. And I also urge this wonderful governing body to once again do the right thing. Do not approve Article 28. And I would like to move the question.
Can't. Oh, no. You can't move the question once you argue. You could have gotten up and moved the question, but unfortunately we can't do it that way. Since the body has already voted to allow Ms. Paley to speak, she's permitted to speak.
Thank you. Joan Paley, former resident of Chelmsford, was born here, went to high school here and for many years. I had to correct a few things that have been said. First of all, the town will not have to come up with money to restore this house. That's the one thing I want to make clear. I am trying to get the extra time, and we had talked to the Finance Committee about this, to allow us the time from now until the fall town meeting to find the buyer, hopefully with the approval of the selectmen. I don't have the ability to do the transaction that the town of Chelmsford does, and I understand that the Board of Selectmen have the authority to sell the house. But this is not about not selling the house. It is about selling the house. That's the whole idea. And are we going to sell the house to a resident, to a one family or two families, where we don't have control over the historical content or value of the house? Or do we want to sell it to an innkeeper who wants to operate it as an inn, to restore the house as going back to the 1800s, to the original condition of the house? And I have found that looking at the reports, 3 different times people went into the house to evaluate the condition and found that it is in good condition. The original context of the house is there. So very little, and I laid it all out in my report, that very little would have to be done. I have been in contact with some groups who might be able to go in and do the restoration, which would not cost a lot of money, and in some cases, no money at all. So this is what I plan to do over the summer, if you would allow me this time, and then we would pay for the expenses. Some of us, my team, has come up with the money to pay for the expenses of the house over the summer, or as long as up until the time that an owner can be found. If I don't find an owner, then in the fall, the town could be sold by the usual means. But this whole idea of an inn is to protect the history that is within the house.
With all due respect, Ms. Paley, you've made that extremely clear. I
Right.
don't think there's any dispute about what your position is.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Judy Carvin, Precinct 7. I'd like to move the question.
We have a motion to move the question.
I'm sorry, I have to say.
So do we have a screen to vote? Thank you.
They'll probably still vote against it. They'll probably still vote against it.
The motion has passed, 125 in favor, 8 opposed. We will now vote on the underlying article, apparently to refer to this as the historic Adams Country Inn of Chelmsford, I guess. So please vote. The yes vote means you're in favor of naming the building the historic Adams Country Inn of Chelmsford. That's really all that this says. The article fails. 26 voted in favor, 102 opposed, 6 abstentions. We will now move on to Article 29.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Article 29 is an article brought forth by the Commission on Disabilities, and the request is to adopt a general bylaw of the community to allow for the provision of large font menus. And I'm going to turn the podium over to Len Olenchek, who has a revised language that I believe he has submitted to the
Mr. Manager,
Yes.
it was my understanding that the petitioner had amended.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I believe
Okay, that's not what's on the screen.
Okay, can you put up the revised language? Where's Len? You see? There he is. Come on up, Len.
Okay.
Good evening. Article 29. Mr. Moderator, may I invite Annie Smith, who is the chairman of the Commission on Disabilities. She's not a town meeting rep, but she is in the audience.
No, as long as she's a resident, there's no issue.
Annie? Come on down. I'm Len Olenchek, and I'm the ADA coordinator for Town of Chelmsford, also the vice chair of the Commission on Disabilities, and also the chairman of the Council on Aging. And the reason I bring those titles up is that a lot of the people that this addresses, or this is for, are people that have low vision. So we can need help, Annie?
Help. To your left.
Just to let you know, ADA, I assume everyone is familiar with it, but sometimes when I go to inspect buildings or some sites, they'll ask me, ADA, are you with the American Dental Association? Or the American Diabetes Association? So we get all sorts of different. But the reason it came up was that there are a number of low vision people in the town. And also by Steve Flynn's numbers, probably by 2020, we'll be close to, the elderly will be close to 28% to 30% of the population in town Chelmsford. And everybody that's young, it's all ahead of you. You're gonna need them. So what we did was say, we're asking the vendors that serve food in the town and have menus to come up with a few. Not all of their menus, so it's not going to be that bad as far as any type of expense for them. A few. And Annie, you want any additional words on that? Or?
No, just that it would support the independence of disabled and elderly people. I know that I have a tough time at restaurants. I carry flashlights and magnifiers and everything like that. And my husband still has to read it to me because you have minuscule print and you're using a magnifier and it doesn't do any good and it's so dark in there. So this is what to help us, because I hate to tell you all this, we are all going to be like that.
I just said that.
I
It's
know.
all ahead of you.
Yep, it's all ahead, and it can happen to you in the blink of an eye.
No pun intended, I take.
Right.
Okay. So what we did was we actually talked to an optometrist to find, okay, what would be the best font. Everybody just understands what a font is. So they said it would be a number 16, which if what we have here is, this is what 16 would look. I know you can't see from, what's on that?
Yeah.
That's a little bit smaller in a way, so that they'd be able to read it with just the minimal glasses. Again, the other reason it came up from some of the seniors and others is that a lot of the restaurants have mood lighting, so the lights are low and it's not as bright. So again, that was one of the reasons for having that font. Also, it's to be a bold, which it is usually with 16 font. And we also, they suggested what's called a calibri. I don't know if type of letters. And so that's what we have put in it. Enforcement, we did change in an amendment because, and put on an amendment, is that initially it was not going to be seen as a punitive type thing, but it's going to be that there will be some pushback. I get pushback on a lot of ADA issues, believe me. And so by having some type of arrangement as far as a fine would be, first would be some kind of a warning. The second would be $25 fine, and the third would be $50, 30 days in between. Annie, you want to see?
Well, yes, and also, please remember that we're only talking about a few menus, like maybe 5 or something like that, because they can be used by everybody in the restaurant. So it's not like it's going to be a costly effect on the restaurant owners.
Yes, and everyone asks, well, what if they have specials? Well, with today's computers and things, we certainly can make their own. and they would change either daily, weekly, whatever. And it could be on an 8.5 by 11, as long as it has a cover on it, so that, you know, from the standpoint of being clean. But, so it's nothing that we're looking to really buckle people down. I did talk to a couple of people in the Business Association, and they said that probably most of them will be fine as far as taking care of it and doing it. Talking to a couple of printers, several of them said the average restaurant's menu would be around $20 to $25, maybe more for a larger restaurant. That's it.
Thank you very much. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee does not have an ability to meet to vote on the amended article.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen hasn't had time to review the amended article also.
Time for questions and discussion.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5. At first, there was a little bit of concern. I mean, 16-point type isn't really that big, so I was picturing something much larger than that. But you see, I'm looking at you with one pair of glasses. In order to read your article in the book, I have to put another pair of glasses on. So I kind of understand what you're trying to say. I was going to come up and offer an alternative solution that you won't need 5 of, you may need 2, magnifying glass with a light on it. I actually have to pull out my phone sometimes in order to read menus in these mood-lit restaurants in normal font. And I'm sure some other people here probably put their phone light on as well. So I support this article as long as it doesn't cause a recurring large cost to a business. So if we know that they're going to print 5 or 6 menus, that seems to make sense to me, that they can do that for their standard recurring menu that they might change once a month or so. But I have a problem if they're going to have to print large font menus for every day of the week that they have a special. Because then they'd have to have printers or go to a printer. So there's a difficulty here that they might want to have some way of exempting the restaurants with weekly specials and asking them to buy a magnifying glass with a light on it for the weekly specials or something like that. Because putting undue burden on the restaurants that have recurring specials doesn't seem to make sense to me at all. What do you say about that?
Well, I think, like I just said, that if they had, with the computers, okay, they could take, whether it's a daily or a weekly, and make their own. If they want to get the bound type of menu, then that's a little different story.
So we're assuming that all restaurants have printers?
I'm sure they have computers and they can have printers or something, or certainly can.
So in that case, I think it's a reasonable thing to do. I would support this article, but I'd also support adding magnifying glasses with lights on them.
Do you want to fund that by any chance, or?
Hi, Steve Flynn, Precinct 3. When we go to our libraries here in town, which we have a real plus, is there a large section of large print books? It's going to be a purpose for that. And our population in our town is one of the highest in the state, elderly, okay? And I think it will probably be an increase of the restaurant's business if they show that they have an interest on their customers. And really, it's not going to be a big cost to them, but it's really something that, when I go to restaurants, I'll be honest with you, there are some prints that are so low, it's really difficult, especially what Lynn mentioned, the lighting. The lighting in some of our restaurants is deplorable. So a large print thing would help tremendously for the restaurant itself and also for the people who will go there who have a hard time reading. Thank you very much.
I'm just curious, there are 5 people in line. Is anyone planning on arguing against that? Okay, we do have someone, so let's go.
Tom Fall, Precinct 5. I too am in favor of this. I used to serve on the Commission on Disabilities, and in the past I've seen how vision impaired people struggle sometimes at the restaurants to understand what's on the menu. I believe, if it's still correct and still on check, is that something like 17% of our population is disabled. And I believe if the restaurant owners would do this, I think it could increase their profits. And once again, I am for this article.
Thank you.
Janet Dubner, Precinct 6. I also support this article. Restaurants have become very sensitive to all sorts of food allergies. They have gluten-free menus. I think this is a simple extension of the same thing. And restaurants have computers to print up a menu that says what the specials are. Shouldn't take all that much time. They're doing it for everyone else. To add a different font for somebody like me who's computer illiterate, I could do it. I think restaurants can do it, and I absolutely encourage voting for this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Tebedy, Precinct 1. Did you, Mr. Moderator, through
Yes.
you to the previous speaker, did you have a chance to talk to the CBA and get feedback? Are they?
I haven't had a chance to talk to the entire board. As I said, I had talked to a couple of the members on there, and they felt that most of the restaurants would comply immediately because they said that a lot of elderly do not go to their restaurants. So you can't say it's the price or what else, but we've asked a lot of people, like I said, from here, and seniors, and also some handicapped individuals, low vision people, which is most of us that are over a certain age.
I'm sorry, but did you have a chance to ask, like, restaurant owners? Did you ask restaurant owners?
No, we have not yet, but we will be, and I did ask to be put on the docket to talk to the Chelmsford Business Association.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Joe Reddy, Precinct 1. I think she kind of answered some of my questions. So I think you guys can appreciate that Dennis Reddy was my father. He had disabilities, and I certainly can appreciate the breadth of this article. But one of my major concerns is, as someone that brings small businesses into this town, we vote a lot of these small bylaws into our regulations. And what happens is these businesses move into town, and they don't have time to go through every regulation that we put or enact, right? So for instance, one that I've encountered would be like the sign bylaw, where they don't know every little nuance. They go to set up business, and the first thing they get is kind of like a cease and desist, which is not a friendly way to enter businesses into our town. And I see this more punitive than trying to help businesses enact this. And I would think that we would be better off asking and encouraging them to do this behavior versus, a first offense of, fining them or to make it sound like a warning. I think it would be better if the commission actually reached out to all the restaurants and said, hey, we would really appreciate this to be enacted by restaurants, or at the very least, maybe amend the article to say, the first offense is really just an education on what it could do to help benefit your restaurant as part of an ADA compliance. And then if somebody really is that ignorant that they don't want to help people that have, low vision, then I could understand that, you take it to another level. But I just think a lot of times we end up, for lack of a better word, slapping businesses that just have no concept that it even exists within the bylaws. So, Joe Reddy, thanks.
Thank you.
Marlene Cody, Precinct 4. So, as I understand this article, and it's a question, it says any vendor that's licensed to serve food. So that's not just restaurants, right?
No, this is any restaurant or business that has a menu that people sit, basically.
But it doesn't say that. It says any vendor that's licensed to serve food. That, to me, also includes like the farmers market people that have, little signs that they write. I mean, how are they going to do large font? Pizza shops that have their menu on the wall.
See, that's not included.
But it doesn't say that.
But it's what we're saying.
So it is included.
It's a printed menu.
It doesn't say that either.
Well,
So I'm
we can
sorry,
put
I'm
that word
against
in.
this article.
Any of the signs that are up, for instance, on a sandwich shop, they have usually a fluorescent background, and their numbers and letters are usually very prominent. So that's not an issue. It's more of the people with a closed menu, or they open up to look, mood lighting, whatever. That's what it's aimed for. And to say that there would be
Okay. Mr.
punitive-
Olenchek, there really is no question, and you're arguing your point from that microphone, so.
I'm new at this, so give me.
I understand you're
Moderator.
passionate, but
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Doug Bruce, Precinct 9. I wholeheartedly support the intent behind this article, being a recent inductee into the eyeglass category myself. I appreciate low light and small print. It's the turning this idea into a law that I take umbrage with, making it more difficult for our small business people in town to comply with the laws of the town. Many of our restaurateurs are not English native speakers. They struggle to complete the required forms to obtain their business licenses and complete required documentation. Another point I wanted to make is many restaurant menus are professionally prepared with graphic artists, and while you or I might be able to rip off a document on our printer at home, these professionally prepared menus reformatting and rescaling these could cost thousands of dollars to incorporate the larger print. So I just wanted to point that out, that this might not be as simple or as minimally impactful as we think it might be on the businesses. It came up earlier with a previous speaker about funding a program to fund providing assistive devices to restaurants. I could wholeheartedly get behind that and some sort of fundraising campaign for the Disabilities Commission to provide assistive devices to restaurants with magnifying glasses with lights or something like that. It seems to me like a minimal cost, and I think we could pass a hat around and collect enough money from just the town meeting to provide a device for each restaurant. It's just an alternative approach to making something a legal requirement, another legal requirement that's enforced upon businesses. And one last point that I'd like to make is that there are already restaurant menu regulations in place around posting calories and information like that on restaurant menus. But the backers of those laws saw fit to provide a small business exemption. Restaurants with a minimal number of seats or a minimal number of franchises or locations or something like that. This, as it's written, would apply to the single entrepreneur that's trying to reopen the pizza restaurant that closed down. So just think about all those things as you vote on this article. I personally will be voting against it, but again, I am wholeheartedly behind the sentiment of the article. Thank you.
thank you.
Johanna Shaw, Precinct 9. Not to beat a dead horse, but I also support the spirit behind this amendment, but have some issues with how it's written. I echo the previous speaker's comments about the wording about vendors who sell food. As a member of the new committee working on the farmers market, I think that could pose a problem for some of our vendors. I also have an issue with the fact that you want to assess a penalty for non-compliance with this article, but you don't have a clear criteria for what non-compliance is, in that you don't have a quantity of menus that need to be available as it's written. So if that were addressed, I might be more inclined to be in favor of this, but as written, I don't think I can vote in favor of this article.
Thank you.
Dennis Sheehan, Precinct 4. I kind of like the idea of having these menus available, but I think we can probably have a meeting with the CBA and just talk to the people and say this would be a good thing to have, rather than have another regulation on the books that's going to affect our small businesses, especially the small restaurants. A lot of the newer restaurants in town are quite small, and to have them have another regulation to deal with, I think it's unnecessary. So I'm going to vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Fall, Precinct 5. The state has regulations already called CMR 521. I believe what we're trying to do here is to strengthen the state regulations, which I'm all for. When you go out doing disability work, there's one statement that kind of is the guideline, and it's called equal access under the law. And all they're asking for is somebody that has visibility problems, they have equal access to that menu. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see no one behind me, so I don't need to move the question.
with.
And I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mr. Polton. Okay, so now we're going to be voting on Article 29, which is the provision for large font menus.
Do I stay here?
Actually, shoot it behind you. The detector's right there. Did it go on there? Okay. Yeah, the receiver's actually the thing sticking up there behind you.
Should I go sit down?
The article fails, 31 in favor, 96 opposed, 4 abstentions. We will now move to the handicap, Article 30. Article 30.
Article 30 is, again, I guess we're setting a rule, but it's already a state rule. But a number of our businesses that get their parking lots painted with the proper symbols is sometimes they just do the wheelchair symbol, but the state law actually is that it have what we call the blue square or rectangle, and then have the white or even a yellow that is put in here. So we're just trying to make that as a law in Chelmsford, that all of them, when it's time to either redo them or the new parking lots, that they follow those state rules.
Thank you very much. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 30.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen recommends unanimously to approve Article 30.
Thank you. Any questions, or you've got the microphone?
Sherman Horton, Precinct 6, newly minted rep. Thank you. Question to the moderator, to the presenter. Do we know in town how much compliance or non-compliance there already is with this?
Actual numbers, no. But as I see them, I do stop in and we talk to people about it. Some will do it, some have pushed back, so we give them a little extra time to do it. If it comes beyond that and they will not do that, because it's a state rule as well, then we will have to do something. I write it up, we send it into Mass Office and Disability, and then, you know, something can be done.
Yep. Mr. Moderator, if you'll allow me, the previous question I had questions with because it wasn't clear what the penalty potentially was. In this particular case, could you clarify the penalty for nonconformance? It is in the bylaws, I believe.
Yes, but if we send a report or a letter to the Mass Office on Disabilities, they can send a stronger letter back to that particular business and say you must comply. But we're just actually saying that when, for instance, when the building inspector is inspecting a building or a rebuild or a parking lot, that they also have the ability to say you've got to do this in town, not just the symbol for the wheelchair.
Yep. And this is a picky one, but do the lines themselves need to be in the blue color?
No. I've been asked that question lately, does the entire space or spaces need to be blue? No. Usually the box, we call it, is anywhere from 2 feet wide to 3 feet long. But they have.
And last question is, and this might be a general question for all of these types of issues, is there a grace period? If we announce this right now, are we causing people to be out of compliance immediately?
No, what I had stated earlier was that when it's time to redo their symbols,
so they have
which winter takes a toll on it for sure, or every couple of years, most of them will do their parking lots, especially with the handicaps. So
my advocation is I recommend people vote for this. I was surprised it wasn't in the bylaws already, when I looked at what was there, and we seem to be in general compliance anyway, mostly throughout town, so I would recommend people vote.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Chris Garahan, Precinct 8. Just wanted to briefly state that I support this article. I think this would be good for the handicapped and disabled in the community. I think it would promote higher compliance with people parking where they should park, if they're handicapped, parking in the handicapped, and not having some of those spaces be used by people that shouldn't be using those spaces. So I think this is something that's good for the community, and I support this article.
Thank you.
Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1. I'm going to apologize for not looking this up beforehand, but could you tell me what is the topic of Chapter 174? In other words, what are we putting this into? What are we adding it into?
I guess I don't understand the, Paul, you have it on yours?
Yeah, Town Council, if you've got an answer.
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, Section 174-5 of the Town Code is entitled Handicapped Parking.
Okay.
I didn't want to be the one to answer that.
Handicap parking. No, 5 is handicap parking. What is 174?
174-5 is handicap parking. That's the title of the
It's Section 5 in Oh. Chapter 174. What is Chapter 174? I understand that
Okay, Chapter
Section 5
174
of
is-
174 is handicap parking.
Mr. Moderator, through you. Chapter 174 is entitled Vehicles and Traffic.
Okay.
Sue Carter, Precinct 5, I'll be real quick. The one comment I would have is we're very specific, and if the state or OSHA changes their standards because they find there's a different color combination that is more effective, we're really tying ourselves into our specifics. So can we add something to it, or whatever the current standards are? So if the feds update the standards, we're not behind the times and putting somebody in a conflict.
Well, this is the standard, this is the standard now.
Right
And
now, right.
if it does change, we would adapt to that, and
Well,
we would,
What I typically like to see in a bylaw is something that we don't have to stay on top of. If federal regs are updated, ours automatically update to the federal regulations, just so that we don't put someone in a conflict.
right, but that's part of what I do, is to check out all of these, and if it does change, we get information from the state and the federal, if things do change. Right now, it hasn't, so, but to answer your question, we would change.
Right, but if those come in, our bylaw would be in conflict with them. Usually, I would like to see if we could have some reference to state or federal regulations, so that if something changes.
Ms. Carter, are you proposing an amendment to the article?
I'm just asking if it could be a friendly amendment.
What?
Friendly amendment?
What the
I have a
question
smile
is?
on my face, if that helps.
No, I just inquiring.
What the questioner is asking, Mr. Olenchek, is would you agree to simply amend so that we're voting on an amended article that says, should the regulations require a different symbol, color, whatever, that you don't have to come before us to do this again?
I'm fine with that.
Somebody's
Fine
going to have
with
to
that.
write it down.
Because I'd be the one enforcing the,
Well, it's got to be written down. Something's got to be formally written. I'm sorry. Them the rules.
comes Gary.
While we're waiting, let me take this opportunity to thank Chelmsford Telemedia for their invaluable assistance in helping us organize this and arrange the speakers and everything else. I'd also like to thank all of you for your attendance and for stepping up. And do we have something here?
Robert Walden, Precinct 9, a point of order.
Yes, go ahead.
By the next town meeting, right now, the only speakers that really work are yours and the selectmen on the front desk. That one's so-so, and this one, most everybody sounds like they're talking out of a can.
I had a problem Monday. It's considerably better now because
Not
now I can
much.
hear you.
I've sat over there all night, and this is the worst town meeting that I've heard from the.
Well,
this
then
mag-
we will work on improving that, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. So I'm just curious, how many other people are having problems today hearing, other than me, which is the least important person to hear? So it's. By the way, just since we're talking about disabilities, we do have assisted devices for those who are hard of hearing. So that doesn't solve the problem with there being sound that people can't hear in a particular area of the room. But you all should know that option is available.
We wait for the amendment.
Mr. Moderator,
Yes,
in the interest of time, could I move that we take Article 31 out of order while Article 30 is being amended?
sure, you could do that. I mean, right, we could do a hand vote on that, though. All in favor of taking Article 31 while we're waiting on Article 30? It passes. Thank you. Mr. Manager?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 31 on the warrant is the final article numerically, and it pertains to street acceptances. And as many town meeting followers are aware, we generally bring up street acceptance at the end of the warrants. And also, if you've been following the last several town meetings, we've notified the town meeting body and the community that the engineering division in Public Works is going through the process of bringing into acceptance a number of ways in the community that for whatever reason in the past never got to the final acceptance status of the community. So you can see the list this evening is Elm Street, Hunt Road, Lock Road, Parker Road, and Robin Hill Road. And the purpose of doing this is twofold. One is to complete the process, but most importantly, the level of Chapter 90 road funding that the community receives is distributed by the Commonwealth under Chapter 90 of the Mass General Laws is dependent upon your accepted road miles in a community. So by not taking acceptance on these roadways, which has certainly been in public use and the town's been repairing and addressing and so forth over the years or decades in some instances, basically we're leaving money on the table that the state distributes from the gasoline tax when you fuel across the Commonwealth. So what is taking place, as we described in earlier efforts, is the engineering division is basically systematically going through the dozens of roadways that are in this category and doing the proper road layout and planning and so forth, and then bringing it before the planning board, which is required, and the Board of Selectmen for acceptance of layout, and then ultimately to the town meeting so that we can have these roads accepted as public ways in the community. So again, we'd ask you to act upon these 6 roads at this meeting, and then again, we'll be back at future meetings till we have the list exhausted. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 31.
Board of Selectmen recommend have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen recommends unanimously to approve
Yeah.
Article 31.
Okay, well, looks like we have some questions or comments. Go ahead.
Planning board.
I was just going to say, the planning board did vote on this as well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
Go ahead.
approved.
Oh, you, okay, very good, thank you.
I'm just helping them out with Article 30. Actually,
You have to identify yourself,
oh,
Ms.
Beth
Logan.
Logan, Precinct 3. So you said we're going to go through this again. Do we have any idea what % of our roads currently are still not accepted? And I do think it's great that we waited for the state to fix Hunt Road before we accepted it.
Steve, you want to come up? Number of roads.
I believe when we started this process, the total was 56 streets, all varying sizes and widths. If you remember last year, the 5 or 6 streets I did were real small. These are really long, so we get a little more bang for the buck type of thing. But now it'll be obscure ones, small ones, some harder, some easier going forward. But I believe after this, there's either 41 or 42 still that will still be unaccepted. Some is just portions, some's the whole street, so you know what, the goal was like a 5 or 6 year plan. We're a couple of years in.
And I gotta ask, because you know how much I love this street, sarcasm, Westford,
Yep.
is that actually ours, except for the fact that we can't fix the highway overpass?
Yeah, Westford Street's a town road other than the
So we can't blame
one at the-
anybody else for that, even though it's the state's fault?
Okay, Ms. Logan,
Okay.
you're sort of off the table here.
Sherman Horton, Precinct 6. The bright green booklet listed Alyssa Way. That's not on this list. Is there a reason for that?
Alyssa Way was possible, that was on the list original. That was a new subdivision, but did not have all the documentation in time.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 8. Is there a plan to put Alyssa Way back on the list?
Yes. Yeah, it probably will be the fall. I did a site walk there actually yesterday.
Randy Leach, Precinct 7. My question is, how much money are we leaving on the table with these 41 or 42 roads that we haven't accepted?
Well, I mean, it's tough to really say. The Chapter 90, the state appropriates $300 million every year. They usually fund $200 million, so you have the 351 municipalities all fighting for that same $200 million. So the more road miles we add in, we get a little bit bigger slice of the pie. So it's kind of a tough number to, right now we get 1.17 million.
Okay,
So
and
we can,
how high would expect that number to get?
I mean, it'll go maybe up to 1.25, maybe when they're all done. I mean, it's not, because again, that 200 million spreads out over all the communities. It's not like we're just suddenly gonna jump. You follow what I'm saying?
Okay. And so every town meeting, we bring 5, 6, 7 roads to the meeting. Is there a reason why we don't have all 42 roads? Is it just the time that it takes to go and measure the roads and so forth?
Correct.
Okay.
Solely because I'm doing it in-house.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? There appear to be none. We are now voting on Article 31, which is the acceptance of the roads enumerated in the article. Unbelievable. Article passes, 125 in favor, 2 opposed, no abstentions. Now we're going back to Article 30, and we do have an amendment. I would like to indicate that paragraph 2 will be amended to add the words, "the currently applicable OSHA and," those are the words that you're adding. So marked with the currently applicable OSHA and international symbol. You can see it at the last sentence. Right, currently applicable. Any questions, comments?
Does it work? Beth Logan, Precinct 3. If OSHA switches to purple, it now says we're going to paint it blue and to the currently applicable OSHA, which is a conflict, wouldn't it be? I was fine with it before.
The article, as I see it, doesn't say blue. It does. Okay.
But can we point out, OSHA will give us X amount of months. They won't just say everybody in the world has to convert tomorrow, so we could just deal with this later.
Well, actually, Ms. Logan, I don't think there's a conflict because it says painted the OSHA handicap blue or other roadway surface symbol marked with the current. So in any event, this is what we're getting to vote on. What? We could change the and to an or. No, you don't want to do it? Fine. We'll vote on it the way it is. Any other comments, amendments? There being none, we're going to vote on Article 30 the way it is. As amended. Yeah. We haven't, I know, we haven't voted to adjourn, so I'm hoping that we have the article is passed, 112 in favor, 15 opposed. Now I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much.